So there was a film in 1984, and the 1984 film, it was the best. It was the Academy Award picture, Best Picture. It's called Amadeus, and it's loosely based. It was actually fictionally based off of the life of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So this musical genius, right? This incredible composer back in the middle of the 18th century. We all know Mozart's name. The movie is kind of about Mozart. I mean, it's such an incredible film. There are some people who say that this is the greatest movie of all time. It came out when I was 10. And so I remember watching part of it and being really bored. But going back now as an adult, I realized this movie is a masterpiece. In fact, very unusually, both male leads were up for Academy Awards for Best Actor. One of them won. The one who played the man who was the enemy of Mozart, essentially. And the movie, the story, again, it's fictional, it's about Mozart, but it's mostly about this man named Antonio Salieri. And Salieri himself was this musical genius. And in fact, Salieri, he devoted his whole life to two things. He devoted his life to God, and he devoted his life to music. That was it. And they're so combined for him. In his mind and in his heart, basically, here is Salieri, and he lived this life, again, devoted to God, devoted to his faith, devoted to his craft. He made so many sacrifices for his music, and in order to be great, and he was great. He made so many sacrifices to the Lord to look for the Lord's blessing, and he was blessed. He was great. He was blessed. He made sacrifices, and he was incredible. No, I've been saying for the last 2 weeks, we've been in the middle of this series called Tough Love. I've been noting that love always involves sacrifice, and I believe that that's true. But I want to make a clarification. Saying that love always involves sacrifice is not the same thing as saying that sacrifice guarantees us love, because that's not the truth. Sacrifice does not guarantee us love. Sacrifice does not earn us love. Sacrifice does not make us deserve love. But that's how Salieri approached God. He had lived a life of incredible sacrifice. He was very rigid. He was very pious. He basically lived an incredibly disciplined life, and he sacrificed everything for God. In fact, that's what he would say, that he sacrificed everything. He sacrificed everything he had, everything he desired for God. But we realize that as the movie unfolds, it's revealed to whom and for whom Salieri actually sacrificed his life. It wasn't for God, it was for himself. It was for his art, and that's revealed when he meets Mozart. Because he heard about Mozart, he heard Mozart's music, and so he was blown away by it. He was blown away by the genius of Mozart's music. And when he met him, he assumed that he in his life, he said, okay, the more disciplined, the more pious, more faithful I am, the more God will bless me, the more he'll give me his genius. And so if I hear this music of this man Mozart, it must be because he's even more faithful, he's even more pious, he's even more saintly than I am. And then when he met Mozart, he found this essentially a child who was spoiled and was foolish and was a cheat and a philanderer and an adulterer and a drunk and was lazy and he was silly. And yet he was still a genius. And Salieri, his whole life was put into this tailspin. How could God bless someone even more than he blessed him, who was so foolish, so undisciplined, so the opposite of holy? How could he do this? And so the rest of the movie, the rest of the story, the rest of his life, this thing that gets in Salieri's heart, it destroys him. Because he simultaneously hates Mozart. Like he despises his behavior, he despises his character, and at the same time, he is captivated by his music. He's captivated by what Mozart can create, and he realizes that Mozart is a musical genius, and not only musical genius, but the greatest musical genius that he had ever heard of in his entire life. And so his life becomes fixated on this love-hate. Ultimately, Salieri manipulates things that ends in Mozart's death. You know, the crazy thing is, Salieri in this film, he thought loving God was a transaction. That I sacrifice this and this and this, and God blesses me in that other way. If I give God all these things, then he's going to give me the things that I want. That's what he thought love of God was. That's what he thought a relationship with God was. And that was all killed. It was all killed when he met Mozart and realized that God does actually love the just and the unjust, that he causes the rain to shine on the good and the bad, that he causes the sun to shine on the just and the unjust. And this destroys Salieri. And it's like the gospel today, because what Salieri realizes in this film is what the people in the parable realize, and we know the story, the landowner goes out, hires people at 6 a.m. They have to work 12 hours in the hot sun, but he also goes out throughout the course of the day. And the big people, the most dramatic is he hires people at 5 p.m. They work 1 hour and they get the usual daily wage, right? Of course. So we know the parable, when it gets to the people who worked 12 hours, they thought that they would get more. At the end of this parable, there's these incredible lines the landowner says to those who were resentful. They resented the fact that they got the daily wage. They didn't resent the fact that they got the daily wage. They resented the fact that others who didn't work all day got the usual daily wage. And the landowner says this, he says, "Are you envious because I'm generous?" Are you envious? Envy is, what a thing. And envy is envy is potentially the worst sin in the world, right after pride. It's connected to pride. But envy is potentially, it's possible that envy has done more damage in this world, in our relationships, and in history than any other sin. And I truly mean that, not only because we can see this in our own lives, but also we can see this in Scripture. Scripture says that we all know that Satan's first sin, right? Lucifer's sin is pride, of course, that he says, "I will not serve. I will not love God in return. I will not receive God's love." But Scripture goes on to say in Wisdom chapter 2, verse 24, yeah, the devil sinned through pride, but what was the motivation of his sin? What was the impetus of his sin? Wisdom chapter 2 says, "Through the envy of the devil, death entered the world." So envy has destroyed. The envy is the thing that caused the downfall of humanity. And what was it? Well, it wasn't that Satan wanted to get something out of the downfall of humanity. Satan didn't want to get anything out of causing Adam and Eve to sin and causing us to sin. Satan knew he couldn't get out of anything. He didn't want anything. In fact, I talked about this at the end of the summer this last year. We were talking about the series on Parabellum. And I shared how I hate board games. That was one thing that got a lot of response, but it's true. They're silly and a waste of time. But also, the reality is sometimes you play board games with people who they're not interested in winning the board games. They are interested in simply making it so that you lose. And they're called little brothers and sisters. They're called older brothers and sisters. They're called siblings. And they're the people who they're not playing the game to win. They don't want to win. They just want you to lose. This is Satan. That is what he is. He's a little brother. No, Satan is the kind of person. Satan does not want to win. He doesn't want to win this world. He doesn't want to win God back. He doesn't want to win anything because not only because he knows he can't, but he doesn't want to. He has envy. He just doesn't want you to win. Because your blessing, your being loved, the gifts God gives you, him seeing that makes him sad. Envy has done more to destroy this world than anything. And so kind of the question is, what is envy? A lot of times people, when they talk about envy, they also talk about jealousy as if they're the same thing. And they're similar, but they're not the same thing. Jealousy can be good, but it can be bad. It can be bad, but it can be good. So we realize that it can be good. Jealousy can be a good thing because God describes himself as a jealous God. So he says that, no, you're my people. I love you. Therefore, if you give your heart to someone else, I'm jealous of that because you're mine and I'm yours. It's kind of like jealousy is good in a healthy married relationship. If a husband and wife are married to each other and one of the spouses starts giving their heart to someone else, it's the proper response of the other spouse is to be jealous. Because jealousy means that, no, wait, I'm yours and you're mine. And we're meant to love each other. If you're taking your heart away, then the proper response is jealousy. Or even just sometimes jealousy can be good when you see someone who's doing something excellent. You see someone who's living in such a way that you're like, wow, that is amazing. Or maybe they have something that's amazing, or a talent or a skill that you look at them and think, that's amazing. I can do that too. That's amazing. And I'm inspired by this. Jealousy can be the kind of thing, the good kind of jealousy, that can inspire us to go after this. Because jealousy says this. Jealousy sees what someone else has or what someone else can do and says, I want what you have. That can be good. It also can be bad, right? A jealousy can also look at what someone else has, what they do, and says, I want what you have, and they take it. So jealousy can lead to either inspiration or it can lead to theft. Envy's different. Envy doesn't say, I want what you have. Envy looks at someone else who has something or can do something and is saddened by the fact that they're blessed. Envy looks and says, I don't want what you have necessarily. I just want you not to have it. I shared this before. The day before my senior year of high school started, my family came back from like a weekend away before school started, and I realized that our house had been broken into, and so we walked through all the rooms in the house and saw all the things that these thieves who had broken into the house had stolen, and once we figured out everything was safe and we're all fine, it was not too much of a big deal. But there was one room in which people didn't steal anything. The people who broke in, they didn't steal anything. They just broke a bunch of stuff. And I remember my dad having this kind of, he's a very sensible man. He's very compassionate. So I remember him saying this. He said, the fact that people broke in and stole our stuff, he says, I mean, obviously I'm upset by that, but it doesn't bother me because I get it. Like, I get it. If you're hungry, I get it. If you don't have something, I get it. If you need something to break in and to steal something because you need to feed yourself or whatever, I understand that. He says, I don't understand just coming in and breaking things. Because one is, I want you to have it and take it. The other is, I don't need it. I don't want it. I just don't want you to have it. That's the difference between jealousy and envy. Jealousy says, I want what you have. And envy simply says, I don't want you to have this. And that's what's happening in the gospel today. Now, some people could say, the people who work 12 hours, no, they're not envious. They want more. But that's not the case. It's very actually clearly not the case. They had agreed for the usual daily wage. That's all they wanted. But then when they found that others were getting the exact same thing as them, they didn't want more. They just wanted the others to have less. And that's the key. I don't want you to have this. Why? Because I deserve more than you. And this is the heart of envy. I don't want you to have what you have because I deserve to have more than you. It's one of the reasons why we'd say that envy is essentially competitive. Envy and pride are similar in that way. Is envy and pride are essentially competitive. C.S. Lewis talks about this. He says that pride, the heart of pride, is not just taking pleasure in being smart or being pretty or being well liked or being funny. That's fine. That's good. Pride is taking pleasure in being prettier or smarter or more well-liked or funnier than someone else. That's what makes pride a sin. And envy is similar. It's not the same, it's similar though. Envy is not taking joy or pleasure in being smarter or funnier. Envy is experiencing sadness when you see someone else who is smart or funny or well-liked or pretty. That's one of the reasons why envy is it's kind of insane. Because other sins give us some moment of pleasure. Envy doesn't give any pleasure at all. It's just sadness. It's sadness at the fact that someone has something and I don't want them to have it. It's one of the reasons why envy takes everything and it truly gives us nothing. It's essentially competitive. We know we've seen this in our lives, of course. We've seen this. There's such a thing as called Schadenfreude. I'm sure you've heard of Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is this German word that essentially means taking pleasure in someone else's pain. It's the reason why like fail blogs exist and like videos of people falling down exist. It's the reason why Schadenfreude is the reason why when we hear bad news about some celebrity, we have some kind of sense of righteousness, some kind of sense of pleasure in this. Like, for example, what happened a couple weeks ago, Aaron Rodgers, first game. Oh, I can't believe this guy. He thinks he can still play. First game, he gets injured, or first play, or whatever it is, first minute, gets injured. And there's some kind of degree of pleasure that some people will take in his failure, in his loss. That's Schadenfreude, but that's just envy. I don't want what you have, Aaron Rodgers. I just appreciate the fact that you don't have it anymore. Pride, essentially, and envy, essentially, are competitive. We see this in the Bible. We know the story of King David and King Saul. So before King David was King David, he was just little David. And King Saul was the king. Now, Saul had been anointed the king. And at one point, he was going through a torment kind of thing. And the young boy, David, came and played music. Speaking of music, he played music for King Saul. And it soothed his heart. And so he was blessed by this young boy, David. Later on, we know the story of Goliath, who comes out and challenges the armies of the Israelites. And for weeks upon weeks, there's no one who's going to fight Goliath until this young boy comes out and says, I'll do it for you. And this is the kind of situation where King Saul, should be rejoicing over this. And he was at first. At first, Saul was incredibly thankful that David had done what David did. And then there's this moment, and it's recorded in Scripture. It's a moment where King Saul takes this young boy, this young man David, who had just slain Goliath, and they ride triumphantly into the city. And everything's fine because Saul doesn't mind. Saul doesn't mind honoring David. He's the king. David is the guy who just killed Goliath. Until there's this song that people in the city are singing. And they're singing the song that says, King Saul has slain his thousands, and David has slain his tens of thousands. And in that moment, Scripture says, something shifted in King Saul's heart. Where he says, wait, they're giving David tens of thousands. They're only giving thousands to me. Now, you pause on this for just a moment. If envy wasn't essentially competitive, you'd say, great, yeah, there's no problem. Why? Because he's a soldier. He's going to be one of my great generals. David's also placing his sword, his strength, he's placing his fighting at my service. David is an incredible servant of King Saul. So yeah, slay your tens of thousands. That's awesome. He could have rejoiced in David's gifts. But he didn't. What also doesn't make sense is that King Saul believed the song. That he gave it a weight in his life that it didn't deserve. Well, first of all, because it says Saul has slain his thousands. He has not slain his thousands. He didn't kill anybody. And David has slain his tens of thousands. David killed one guy. Like, if he just would have paused for a second, he would realize this is simply not true. He could have let it go. But we know this. Envy is essentially competitive. Funny thing is, we also end up choosing our competitors. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, that envy is essentially competitive, and we end up choosing our competitors. We end up choosing our rivals. We're not envious of everyone. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. We're not envious of everything. We're not jealous or envious of everyone around us or everything. And not everyone's gifts makes us sad, but only certain people's gifts, only certain people. We choose our competitors. We choose our rivals, and also, we choose our friends. I remember hearing someone describe how do you know if you have a good friend? They said a good friend is someone that you can tell bad news to, and they're not going to tell you why you're stupid. They're not going to tell you that you're dumb for being sad about this. But then he went on to say, a good friend is someone you can also tell good news to, and they're willing to rejoice with you. So we choose our competitors, but we also choose our friends. And this kind of friendship is love. This kind of friendship it's tough love. To really choose to receive the love that you've been given, rather than resent the love someone else has been given. That's tough. It's tough to choose to receive the blessings you've been given rather than resent the blessings that someone else has been given. This is tough love. To choose to rejoice in someone else's blessings. That is tough love. Because their blessings take nothing away from you. To realize that if we have tough love, we can be friends with those people that we can now consider our rivals. There's a moment at the end of the movie, Amadeus, of almost friendship between these two men, Mozart and Salieri. It's a scene where here's Mozart, he's been living a horrible life, and he's on his deathbed. And he's actually in the process of dying. But he's written this Requiem Mass, is a musical piece for a funeral mass. And he's not going to finish it, but Salieri's there with him and he's encouraging him. And so as Mozart's lying in bed dying, here he's dictating out loud, and Salieri's writing this down. And it's this incredible, it's the climax of the movie. It's an incredible moment where you get a glimpse at what could have been. Because they spend the entire night finishing this Requiem, and you have this person's brilliance added to this person's brilliance, creating something truly brilliant. And you realize, as you see this scene, this could have been their entire life. If Salieri hadn't allowed envy to corrupt and poison his heart, and resentment to corrupt and poison his heart, this could have been their entire life. They could have had joy and not envy. Their life could have been marked by friendship and not being enemies. But when we give in to resentment, when we give in to envy, we choose our own enemies. The most tragic aspect of the movie, I think, is not just that Salieri chooses Mozart as his enemy. The most tragic part of this movie is that Salieri ends up choosing God as his enemy. He had believed, the more disciplined I am, the more sacrifices I make, the greater I'll be. That's our arrangement, God. It's a transactional relationship. When he found out that God even blesses the unrighteous, that God blesses those who didn't work as hard as he did, he actually says out loud that he chooses to make God his enemy. And this is the last thing. He didn't have to. We hear in the scripture today that God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. That his love has a logic that we don't live by. That he doesn't wait for us to earn his love. He doesn't wait for us to deserve his love. He just wants us to receive his love. That's it. He just wants us to receive his love. And Salieri's problem was that he chose resentment. He chose envy. And he could not rejoice because he would not receive the love that he'd been given. He just simply focused on the love that someone else had been given. But this is tough love. Tough love is being willing to receive the love, the blessings, the gifts that you've been given. Not what you think you've earned. Not what you think you deserve. I think so many times we spend so much of our lives, we spend so much time being envious and bitter by looking at what others have. So we miss out on what we have. Most importantly, I think we're envious because we miss out on the fact that we're already loved by God. That's the irony of the entire movie. It's the irony of the entire story. Here's Lucifer, already loved by God. Here's Saul, loved by God. Here is us, already loved by God. And if we receive that love, then we can rejoice. If we receive that love, then there's no room for envy. Because you're already loved by God. Again, the greatest irony of this movie is it's called Amadeus. Amadeus literally means loved by God. The very title is the irony. Here's Mozart, who's a fool and a waste and a scoundrel, and he's loved by God. And he's Salieri, who is devoted but bitter and resentful and envious, and he is loved by God. The remedy is this irony, that envy can only take up root in a heart that refuses to be loved by God. So our challenge and our invitation is to let go of resentment, to let go of envy, and to receive the love that God has offered us, instead of looking at the love he's offered to someone else. To receive his love and to rejoice in the love that he's given to those around us.